very, very bright group of individuals coming from all different spaces and areas of life that we need to explore before we get started with anything. Um, you know, first thing goes by, the first thing we need to talk about is why we're here and why we want to talk to the people. And I'll leave that to you, Mr. Lipscomb. Why are you here? What do you like to do? What are you doing? What's your background, and where do you find your need to be in this area for?
So thanks. I think the biggest thing I guess I'm representing is the need for racial literacy. I have created a website called the Work.Education, and I put that out last year. And the biggest thing about it is kind of owning your own journey around racial literacy and just kind of understanding that there's a need to be educated there. And I think I put it out shortly after George Floyd. I had been working on it for about 3 months prior. I think actually Ahmaud Arbery made me realize that there needs to be an understanding there about how much work should you do, instead of leaning on POCs or other marginalized populations to essentially do the work for you. I think generally I'm just coming from a place of just education, since that is my primary job. And I teach grades like beginner, like kindergarten through ninth grade. And kind of incorporating racial literacy into our curriculum has been a strategic priority for us. And I do consulting on the side. So I also help other businesses try to strategize around how to talk about race in the workspace and really kind of redirect their cultures, should they feel to reach out. And so it's been actually quite successful, just kind of getting a chance to touch base with some of these companies. A lot of them are recognizing that there are blind spots in those spaces. And I think it's important to kind of help them acknowledge those blind spots, but then don't stay in the space of just acknowledging well, now I feel guilty that this thing happened, or I feel shameful that this practice has been going on. But rather getting into the conversation around so what to do next. So what are you prepared to do? So I'm in the solution oriented space. Hopefully get a chance to hear from you guys as well. And I'm always about just so what are you prepared to do? So that's going to be the energy that I'm bringing into this space tonight.
Appreciate that answer. And Dan just put your website in the chat just in case anybody want to look at it or jot it down for later. Um, Mr. Prophet, you put POCs.
Yeah, Derek hit POCs, hit me with an acronym, so I was just trying to understand what.
Yeah, people of color, and there's a new updated one, BIPOC. So those are Black and Indigenous and people of color, just so that it's a little bit broader, to kind of make sure that we're actually taking space to talk about Black experience in America, Indigenous experience in America, and then there are other POCs, other persons of color that might be experiencing America a little bit differently.
And it's crazy because I was reading something that there's a lot of even with people, some Black people are we don't want to be put into that POC culture, but it's well, you are a person of color anyways,
Right.
And you have to find some sort of relation to people who look kind of like you or gone through some of the things that you've gone through.
Right. And I think sometimes you do get a lot of resistance there, where I don't want to be seen as a collective group. And that's actually part of the process of just kind of recognizing your own identity. But here in America, we're in a very interesting racial space where it's not so much as how you see yourself, but really taking into account of how the world sees you too, and kind of navigating that space, almost like dual identities or double consciousnesses, WEB put it, and kind of navigating in these new spaces, especially post George Floyd, where I think it's really kind of hanging on everybody's mind as well.
Mm-hmm. Right, right. And speaking of dual identities, I feel like as a doctor, you kind of have two identities. I feel like you have, your professional side, your doctor side, that you go into these hospitals and you go to these patients that you have, and you're like, showcasing all the knowledge that you learned. But then it's also the second identity of your personal side, which you try to also showcase to your patients, but you can't really, you got to have some sort of mixture. You can't just do one side or the other. Um, Speaking on that, Dr. Smith, what do you think your identity is as both being a doctor and being personal? Do you see yourself being a doctor that's focused on just helping people professionally, or do you think you're also trying to do it personally at the same time? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I do think I try to relate with people on a personal level. I think that's one of the beautiful things of having a physician that's a person of color and kind of having that connection with your patients. Because we know that like external stressors affect your health. And so I'm able to like talk to, like when George Floyd happened, like talk to my patients, like it's really affecting me. I know it's causing you stress as well. So I do try to be personable and try to connect with people on that level. I think one of the hard things about being like one of the beautiful things in Cincinnati is there are a lot of Black patients, and when they do see me, there's a lot of joy and a lot of people saying they have a lot of pride. And I love those experiences, but I wish I was not the exception. I wish it would be more normalized. I think there's a lot of guilt of trying to, I don't want to be just seen as the Black doctor. I want to be seen as this amazing physician, no matter what my color is. But that I do have that special connection with patients of color. But I think that's one of the things that one of my goals in my career is to help other people navigate and become physicians of color, because studies have shown that Black Americans do get, unfortunately, better care when their doctor is a person of color. Last year it came out about like health of newborns and things like that. And so the statistics are out there. So we do need to try to get more kids interested in STEM and being a doctor. But there is always that dual personality of what's at work and kind of your home life. But I feel like I'm in a really supportive place that does let me showcase my personality.
And you're at Christ Hospital, right?
Yep.
And how long have you been there?
So I have been there a year and a half now. I went to University of Cincinnati for medical school though as well. So I had some rotations at Christ there beforehand. So I've been in Cincinnati about 6 years now.
Okay, nice, nice. And you and Dr. Garanci both go to Christ and work there. And Dr. Garanci, you also went to UC, or?
No, I actually went to Virginia Commonwealth University, so it's in Richmond, Virginia. So I moved here for residency. So I also did my residency at Christ Hospital and my geriatric fellowship there as well. And now I'm faculty at UC and at Christ Hospital. So I work with the residents like Dr. Smith and then the geriatric fellows as well.
My question to you both, do you see a difference in the way that your patients come to you? Do you see a difference in like, since you're both Black and white, do you think that your patients treat you both differently? I know you don't have the same patients, but do you see some sort of difference anywhere? In like
I think part of the fun thing is that we do actually overlap sometimes. So I'm one of the supervisors for Dr. Smith. So in the hospital, for instance, she may have the patient and then I come in later with the bigger team, what we call rounds. And so we have that opportunity to interact together. And while I certainly try to be humble and connect with all my patients, the reality is just always that Dr. Smith and our other Black residents connect differently. And it's really, I think Dr. Smith put it well, of it's so beautiful to see, and it also breaks my heart at the same time. Just a little bit of the fact that I know I just finished reading the book Medical Apartheid. There's lots of talk about Tuskegee and these other things that have happened, but there's been way more than that. And then we also know that there still is plenty of racism and racist outcomes in the healthcare system now. Yes, yep, it's a great one and hard, good and hard. So I do have to realize that I carry that with me. No matter how much I read, how much I grow, how much I'm doing community engagement, I still carry that with me. And so I need to do the extra work to be trustworthy towards for my patients. Whereas I think Dr. Smith has a different entrance to that as well. Of course, that also means she has other challenges that I don't deal with, unfortunately, as well. And that's something we try to talk about a lot and make sure that she feels safe in her role. But yeah, I do think there's a lot of truth to the fact that it's going to take extra steps for me. She mentioned like responding with some of the murders over the summer. I'm going to have to enter those conversations differently, right? Like I'm going to have to specifically ask about it and say, how are you doing? Like that's probably not something that's going to bring up with me comfortably without me taking those steps. So I think it's up to me and other Black or other white physicians to take those extra steps to build that trust. Yeah.
I appreciate that answer. And I appreciate you both just being willing to work together and be on a Zoom call. It's interesting. It's great to have both perspectives. And I honestly would not have brought you here if I didn't feel comfortable with you, talking to a majority Black crowd. And it's like, you're the type of doctor I wish we had more of. And I wish we had more adjusting to us than there is. And so I want to just thank y'all both for being here. And with that, Mr. Prophet, as a mayor to be, you have to adjust to nearly everybody. I mean, you have to come in with your own set of perspectives, right? And your own set of beliefs and whatever. But then you also have to expand your thought process and expand your heart to go to other perspectives. How do you see yourself doing that as the next mayor to be? Doing, talking to white individuals, Black individuals, mixed individuals, everybody in Cincinnati. How do you see yourself doing that in a city that's, as we all know, is kind of conservative in its own way?
Enrico, it's funny while you're just laying all that out, and I'm sure I'm not the first one to coin this phrase, but I would see myself as collaborator in chief, right? And so what I bring, with my background and my perspective is that understanding that you solve these issues, these problems in a collaborative way. You can't do them in a vacuum, right? And oftentimes Cincinnati, I'm a lifelong Cincinnatian, born, raised, educated, and I served here on the fire department 32 years, National Guard, which is a community organization as well as the military. Especially Cincinnati has somewhat of a history of being parochial, right? The paternalistic, that certain people know what the right thing for other people, and that becomes really an obstacle to progression, how we move forward as a city. And it reminds me of a book that I read by Patrick Starkey, I believe, was Stuck in Place. I recommend everyone read that. He and a lot of the data, in terms of that, a lot of the disparities, especially after the civil rights movement, these great society programs, there was a snapshot in time. You're looking at that, and he went back and analyzed it, and we're essentially at the same place, right? And so his book is titled Stuck in Place. So, long story, I become that collaborator in chief. And I'd have to do it through a certain core set of value systems. And the most important one is fairness.
I love it. Fairness and equality, because you can't have equality without fairness, right?
Well, when I see fairness, it's like, and that's so broad. But I always look as fairness is, you got to codify, you got to write it down, right? This is what's fair. Because oftentimes, oh, I'm being fair. Well, that's not what the rules say. You're supposed to do this. But then oftentimes the rules aren't fair. And so you have to really sort of deconflict that, really, unpeel all of that systemic and structural racism that a lot of people talk about, but really, I don't know if we really truly understand what that really looks like. And so you really have to really get down and sort of deconflict that. And me being a firefighter, we got to put the fire out, and being a military infantry officer, you see that hill, you take that hill. We do those things in a practical, pragmatic way. And so as mayor, that's the way that I would get at those things. But again, through the core values of just doing what's right, just, and fair. So
I love that answer. And I could tell that your firefighter experience, it plays a major role. Of course, from being in it for 30 years, that's going to be everything you put your, that's just going to be everything you just fall back on when things fall apart.
Well, and I tell people I lucked in that job, that I was signing up to be a cop, and they said, hey, they're looking to hire more minorities, and so I reluctantly signed up, but the thinking on my way out was like, you run out of burning buildings, not into one, right? So, but 30 years later,
man, don't be running into burning buildings, man. You can't be doing that. Not anymore as a mayor.
Hey, maybe. Hey, I think Cory Booker did something like that or something, right? When he was like, he was something when he ran into a burn. Anyway. If the need arises, I know to stay low, right? Stay low.
Right. Stay low. And that leads us to Miss Aisha. Now, I haven't had a chance to talk to Aisha that much, but I know that she's a powerful woman, powerful Black woman that's in education and as an administrator. Tell us more about yourself. Tell me more about yourself if you can, if you are willing.
Okay, well, I am an educator. I've been an educator for 21. This is my 21st year. I started out at a charter school in Cincinnati back in the early 2000s. It's where I cut my teeth, learned how to teach. Then I was there for 3 years, and I moved to Lakota. I'm very much like Mr. Prophet. They were looking to hire minorities back then. So I took the opportunity to go on an interview. They called me before I even got out of the parking lot because they needed minorities so bad. So for those of you, I work in Lakota. I don't know. It's a very, you talk about Cincinnati and how Cincinnati is very conservative. Well, most of the conservatives live right there in Westchester, Liberty Township. So through my teaching in Lakota, I was there, I taught in the classroom for 17 years, and I taught first and second grade, and I moved around to the district is huge. I don't know if you guys are familiar, but they have 23 different schools. I was a first and second grade teacher, bounced around to about 4 schools because just seniority issues. But it gave me a chance to see the way that our POC kids were being treated. So back in the early 2000s, there were not a lot of, I can count on one hand how many teachers of color there were in the district. But the population was starting to change because they were doing, pushing people out of their homes, and they were coming up to Westchester because they had they had housing for them to go to. And Lakota had never seen anything like that before. So the very first year that I was there, I had a room full of kids of color because nobody knew how to treat or teach these kids. And this was 20 years ago. And I'm like, are you serious? So I'm going to fast forward. You know, I was always the only Black teacher in the schools that I've always been in. So our representation of people of color in our district has gone up tremendously. I mean, not just Black and, you know, Hispanic is huge, but we have people from all over the world. You know, we have one school where they speak like, there's like 60 different languages in that building. And wow. The problem is that the district is flourishing, moving, being more diverse, living the same way the world is. But the people that were inside of this district, who have been inside of this district for years and years and years, because basically it's basically a bubble where they graduate from Lakota, go to Miami University, Miami of Ohio, and then come back and work for Lakota. So you have, and out of like maybe 2,500 people that work in a district, well, let me go back before I skip. So my last 4 years in the classroom, I was starting to feel a little used, because it was always where I would have the kids of color or the kids with socioeconomics, low socioeconomics, which led to different behaviors, but it didn't bother me. I loved them. They were my babies. I took care of them like they were my children. And then it got to a point where I was in burnout, because everybody around me on my team had these really easy classes where the kids were perfect. You know, they're walking down the hall. My kids are crazy, of course, because it just is what it is. And I fell into a burnout. So I was going to get out of teaching. I didn't care if I had to go work at Walmart. Welcome to Walmart. And so I had mentioned it to someone in the district, and coincidentally, at the same time, we had parents. We had some really good parents, educated, just parents fighting for kids of color in our district. And they stayed on top of our superintendent like you wouldn't believe, and made her make a position for diversity and inclusion in our district. Wow. So they came with their P's and Q's. They had, you know, PowerPoints, and, you know, they had set up a program. I mean, they wanted this to happen, and they knew that if they waited for Lakota to do it, it just wouldn't happen. So they took the initiative. The superintendent said, okay, let's hire someone for this diversity and inclusion. I was, you know, they knew I had worked in the district for 100 years. I knew like a lot of people. So they asked me to do the job. So I've been in a classroom for years, almost 2 decades. And now you're asking me to be a DEI person. I had no clue what I was doing. And I guess they threw me in there because, you know, I'm going to go back to what Mr. Prophet said. The systems that exist, people don't realize how deep it is. Okay, so I'm in this job in a really, really hard part of town. Obama had just been elected president, and everybody in the area was kind of feeling some kind of way about that. And so here I come with my new job. I'm like, hey guys, I'm the Black girl to tell the white people how to act right. Hey, you know, so that, I don't know how well that went over, you know. Luckily people liked me in the district. So it was like, oh, that's Aisha, she's cool. You know, whatever she's saying is cool. It must be all right. So I ended up getting a mentor. I'm sorry, I'm dragging on, but I ended up getting a mentor who was absolutely perfect, and he helped me achieve the goals. 2019, I won the Educators Holloway Award for creating diversity and inclusion in the district. You know, and I've been really pushing to get Lakota out there, you know, to help parents. And we have turned a corner where Obama went in, and then the other president came in, and things kind of shifted in my whole job. And I could feel them trying to phase me out. because the people in the community, we have real big issues with levies. And to pass levies, you have to keep parents happy. Oh, it's just a lot of politics and systemic things going on. So, you know, they want the work, but they don't want to put it out there that the work's being done because they don't want the community to complain about it. So I'm on this wheel of trying to do my best to help teachers. My biggest thing right now is helping teachers understand their bias and not take it out, talk the kids crazy, because that's our biggest issue. Teachers saying things to be, you know, I don't know, cool or whatever, or just being an ass sometimes. And they'll say things and then they go home and they tell their parents, and then it's this big brouhaha of really, you know. So at this point in my career, I am trying to I'm opening up a consulting business because I really do not feel that the work that could be done is they're not allowing me to do that work. So I'm looking to get out, but now to have someone in that job with me who started, he has no clue like I did at the beginning, and is trying to make it work, but it's just not. And so I'm going to sum it up with my frustration is, you know, all these things that we talk about out in the world of race, we see on TV, we see people, you know, being killed by police, we see the White House being whatever, we see all of these things, but the most important part is that foundation. And my biggest goal in my entire life is to make sure that children are treated, I'm just gonna say the word correctly. I don't like the word fair. I think that's a systemic word that, you know, you've all seen the boxes where everybody's standing looking over the fence, you know, equality and equity. I have real issue with, you can say it's fair, or you can pretend like it's fair, but most of the time, you know, it isn't. So I fight for kids, and I want to make sure that our kids are being seen, heard, understood, need to feel important, because that's that foundational piece that once they get up to be a doctor or, you know, get into their careers, they need to know that you can do, I want people to know that you don't have to work 100 times harder just because you're Black, which you do. We all know that. But I want kids to have that in them already of, I don't have to be better, I already am, you know? And so in order to have that, you have to have the right teachers. So it starts with training teachers to realize how they grew up, what they think, how you're presenting yourself in the classroom in front of your kids. So that is my lifelong journey. So
Wow, what a lifelong journey that is, and what a incredible one that is. I mean, first of all, you shouldn't have to do any of this. You should not be put in a position to do any of this. And for you to do it is courageous in itself. What do you see your end journey as being? Eventually, you know, when you look back 10 years from now, 5 years from now, what do you see yourself doing? And what do you see yourself completing and accomplishing?
well, I would love for there to be real work in education. I do not have an answer to, because I mean, you can say all day that you guys are diverse, you know, you can say your company's diverse or your school's diverse, or you treat all kids the same. I don't see color, you know, I don't like that one. But there's a whole lot of stuff out there that it's a lot of talk, and I would love to 100% have diversity in the schools, meaning curriculum. I mean, there's so many crevices and there's so many rabbit holes that you could go into in education because it's so systemic, and we don't have the education that we need. I saw a meme the other day that said, why is it that your history gets taught every day and mine is an elective? Stuff like that has to stop, because our kids are growing up not knowing, hell, I grew up not knowing history and the good things that people of color have done, because we've never been taught that. So I want to take it all the way back to when kids are in school. I want them to learn about these things. I want them to grow up with this diversity in their mind and not be treated differently. I don't know if that's like overshoot, but that's my lifeline goal. So.
No, you're totally on point, and I love that. I absolutely love that, and I love that you said the work. And every time I think of the work, I go straight to Mr. Lipscomb, because he is the work, and he put in a website called The Work. And it's like y'all both. I could see y'all both are like kind of the same, just playing field. The same level, and getting that diversity, getting that correctness in the schools. I want y'all both to talk about that together a little bit. And there, I want you to just talk about how you are, how are you seeing yourself in the work right now? What do you see yourself doing, and accomplishing over the next 5-10 years, along with, Aisha, with getting that diversity in the schools and in the history books and in the classrooms, and making sure everyone being correctly treated?
Yeah, and Aisha, I'm letting you know right now, like, it's almost as if you and I are kind of living in the same space. I'm on the Upper East Side. I work in the Upper East Side here in New York City, and it's predominantly white, upper class, upper middle class. I work at a school that is that's for boys, and so they have to identify as boys. So there's an intersection there. They're predominantly Christian, even though we have a wide range of different religions, but like we are non-denominational, but we still say the Lord's Prayer, for example. So what kind of setup are we setting when we have Jewish families or Muslim families come into the space and say that, we're being equitable, we're being inclusive, but we say the Lord's Prayer, more or less every Friday. And so excuse me, some of these practices I've labeled like somehows, and you guys can really kind of go into your own institutions and kind of label them as well. But somehow we've gotten into a situation where somebody's being excluded, voices aren't being heard, yada, yada, yada. And nobody's necessarily, to blame for that. But again, somehow we have to figure out how to undo it in order for us to kind of make our way towards like an actual inclusive community. And so one of the things that I bring up with, even my space is thinking about, when you break down diversity, equity, and inclusion, oftentimes there's a lot of push for the diversity piece. And so you get a lot of just faces. We want faces, we want experiences, we want your voice in this place. We're going to make space for you to be able to talk about it. But then when it comes to like acknowledging some of those systemic issues that those voices and those experiences bring up, that's where, institutions have to rely on the E and the I part. And that's actually where there starts to be a very large disconnect. And you recognize then that, in order to make this place equitable, what things need to be done in order to make this place not just inclusive, but more belonging for others. What are the steps, what are the action steps that come there? And, lo and behold, you find out that a lot of this diversity or this push becomes very cosmetic. So what can I do that essentially makes it seem that I'm doing the work, but rather not necessarily diving any deeper than just the faces. And so, I talk a lot about it within, my own school. And just as you put it out, Aisha, like Trump being elected did do something to our conservative space. And I am one of 3 Black teachers that work there, but the other 2 teachers already feel the pressure of being Black in that space alone. And, the other added part there is that there are some families that make a lot of money. They're very publicly known figures, and they don't have to care within that respect. Like they make so much money that I send my kid to a private school so I don't have to participate in this DEI conversation. But now all of a sudden, I'm now pushed in automatically, and my kid is coming home with questions about what's going on outside. And, I didn't sign up for this. I pay 50 something $1,000 a year, so I don't have to talk about this, but now all of a sudden I do. And so navigating that space as a Black person is tiring. I can tell you right now that you don't get paid enough for what you do, Aisha. It does not matter what number you tell me,
Yes.
it is not going to be enough. So hats off to you for even really diving down into that, knowing that, there's never going to be enough acknowledgement about the shadow work that you have to participate in on that respect. And so, for me at least, going into these spaces knowing that I know that it's going to be an uphill battle, and I know that creating the work, for example, that website actually helps me at least direct some of those families that do want to do something but don't know where to start. And we usually call it analysis paralysis, where you've thought about it so much that now you've frozen and nothing's getting done, and now all of a sudden, you have the shame and you have the guilt and all these emotions that are coming into the space, but you have nowhere to have the outlet. And so for me in my position, because I'm not technically a DEI coordinator, they will not hire one, nor will they call it that, because they know that the greater Buckley community would be upset at it. So instead, it is a dark part of my contract, basically, that they pay me for, but it is nowhere written that I'm doing this. And so even that in itself is a systemic issue. But even more so, how many other POCs does this happen to, where you are tasked simply because you are a person of color that is passionate about doing this work, and here's a stipend, or here's a round of applause or something to that degree, rather than them recognizing that oh, I'm giving this person more work simply because of who they are. How can I do something within my platform and my power to be able to work for them? So not just being an ally, but rather an accomplice. Because allyship, you're doing the work and it's great, but every so now and again you do have to check in sometimes to make sure, and you can't call yourself an ally, that's got to be something that somebody calls you. But when you're an accomplice, you are doing this work, you don't need to be checking in. You just know exactly where you need to go. You've got the research, the resources, and more solution-based thought processes to kind of guide you through that, and you are dismantling. So that's where the anti-racism piece shows up, but rather you're using that space to really kind of pull apart the institution itself and consider for yourself, should this thing be refined or reformed, or should it be abolished completely and built from the ground up? And I think as we kind of talk about those things, just talking about them kind of moves that power structure into a space where if you are in power, now you're uncomfortable. So I've usually got an administrator, or, I sit down with our head of school almost every day at this point to really talk about how, not only he can lead in this space, but rather how he can trust me to also lead in this space. And, for a school like Buckley, which I don't know if you guys know Gossip Girl, for example, but Buckley kind of falls in those types of schools, very private, it's got the boys are in blazers, and anybody who's anybody just goes to this type of school if you're in New York City. And how that namesake now, those traditions that come with it, are now being put under a microscope. And that's uncomfortable. And for me, at least, it's a lot of soothing. It's a lot of managing just the fragility, a lot of managing the anxiety around talking about something that is very new to them, but not very new to me. And when you're backed with that type of research, it actually becomes very intimidating. Added on to the intersection that I am male, added on to the intersection that I am Black, and there are only 2% of Black educators in the United States, and really kind of recognizing that for a lot of the people that work at Buckley, that go to Buckley, this is the first time that they've really been talked to by somebody of this stature. And so recognizing that, I don't want to be a voice for an entire race, but lo and behold, I don't actually get to make that decision sometimes. And so I have to be able to step into that role effectively and be able, so that's why I read all the time. I've always got a book in my hand. I want the boys to be able to see that, like, I'm still reading just like you guys are. I'm always in the space of learning. Even though I got out of school, I'm still in the learning space, and making sure that for them, knowing that it's a journey, that, it's not going to be just, I graduated, so now I know everything, but rather getting them into a space and lead by example, that, you should always be reading different viewpoints and things like that, and come into this with an understanding that you want to learn something after you leave.
You completely understand me. Oh my gosh.
We'll exchange info after this, because I feel like,
yes, please do.
Yeah, because as soon as you start consulting, like, setting it up for a place like Cincinnati is going to help, like, so many other schools. And, like, I could easily see you talking about this with other townships and districts, so that they can get the same level playing field and communicate with each other about what works, what doesn't work. But then even more so, like, it gives you an idea too of just how much, and this is where I hope that, you can find more help and support, but just how much work has to be undone before you can even, like, start moving forward. And it's not surprising that they task you with watching the Black kids. I almost feel like the school was just like, you're really great at this, so
they blow smoke. Oh, you're so good with the kids.
you're like, oh my gosh, we're living the same experience. But and like, it's interesting. It's just an interesting way that it pans out.
And through it all, and also something you said, in my mind, I thought, okay, I'm going to be working with different districts, talking to them about, like you said, about things that work and don't work. But the more and more I do this, I am truly finding out that DEI, whatever they check their box off and call it, because that's really what they do, is not at the top of the list in grade school. All the schools that, and I know people at different schools around this area that do the same thing, and it's very strategic how they do it. Like you said, they actually gave me the job, which is mind blowing. But a friend of mine who works in a neighboring district, he is a Spanish teacher. He's Hispanic. His name's Jorge. And they gave him a little stipend for one period to do diversity work. So in any grade school that I've dealt with, people I know, they always make it a priority on paper, but then they don't want, and they never want to call me, diversity anything. They want to say, they breeze over it, like, oh, well, she does work with kids of color, and so they try to make it sound like I'm just this little person who, there's only one of me that works with all the kids. I represent all the kids of color in the district, and that's how they try to play it out. So real quick, and then I'm going to stop. So here was my, I had to be very strategic in, like you said, standing in front of a bunch of white people, telling them that they have bias, and, parents are calling them racist, and they're angry and they're upset and they can't understand, and all those things that are there. It's not very easy as a Black woman to say, yeah, you're kind of being a racist. And, and I've gotten to the point where I'm so tired. I'm like, really? Why did they call you racist? Why do you think? Really? So think that out, and then I'll come back and we'll talk. But so what I've done is I have a group, a cohort, and this is Dan came and talked to them for me. This is what I did. I went around we have 23 schools. So I asked around in the schools and the principals and working with HR, and I asked the principals to get me someone who is woke. Okay. Now I didn't have a lot of options with people of color, because a lot of people of color don't want to do this job. They're barely hanging on and they're doing what they need to in the classroom. So most of my people, I got one from each school to start. Most of them are white women who have read some books. Some of them are married to people of color, have mixed kids, and and they feel this and they see it. You know, they don't live it like we do, but they see it, and they're woke-ish. And so what I do is I train them, and I train them up on, you know, everything Black, everything brown, everything that's different than white. And then I send them out there and I have them teach their peers at their school. And so they teach it, not me, not the Black girls standing up there, but white people that stand up there, white women that say, let me tell you what I used to think. Wokish. Let me tell you what I used to think, and this is what changed my mind, because they can take that differently from a person that looks like them than me, who's, they feel like I'm accusing them or pointing my finger. So I have a strategy. Now, I don't get a lot of help from the top because it's very hard for a white man to, and they have the nerve to want to observe me for my job. I'm like, are you serious right now? What are you observing? You know, so the politics and the stickiness, like, so that's what I do. That's my strategy. Feel free to use it, anybody. Just get a team of people that are woke and let them talk to the people that are not woke. So that's my little 2 cents.
And it harkens back to usually when Black churches were starting to spring up, oftentimes there would be a white representative to watch that Black church in action so that, you know, the pastor isn't riling up the base and, you know, the language is okay, and really kind of policing the behaviors of just other Black people. And so whenever I have an administrator come to watch, you know, me teach a lesson or something like that, you know, I do make sure that they kind of understand this is what it looks like on the outside, and this is how I'm perceiving it. And it's not as if I don't want your presence there, but I want you to recognize the racial aspect and the undertone that's coming into this space, because you're also in a space where I know more than you do, and you know I know more than you do. And so recognizing that power dynamic shifting is also uncomfortable for some. And, you know, it's almost as if, you know, even in the hospitals, like, you know, a resident coming to observe and attending, just because that resident is white and the attending is Black, and the resident is going to report to somebody. Like, there's a lot of issues there if that were to be the case, but this is no different. And so, you know, I think often for these discussions, especially since George Floyd, recognizing that there's got to be more of an acknowledgement of just like these institutional practices that take place, you know, on a regular basis, and how normalized they've become over time, and how, like, you know, for a person of color, they immediately see them, but what to do when they do see them, how to go about talking about them that's not going to be seen as like, there goes Aisha again, banging the drum as usual, calling us out, but rather like she's calling us out because she wants to help us. And we've got to switch our mindsets around, like, we need to be in a space where we need somebody to be, you know, pushing us, so that, you know, we're not looking at just the statistics around it, but rather, are the statistics felt? Can we actually feel the work being done, you know, through the kids that we teach?
Also, I know that this is not going to be done in my lifetime. You know, I look at it as I have to keep planting the seeds for everyone, and hopefully, you know, through passing my lifetime, that will grow in them, and we can just, through the years, keep it going. So.
And Mr. Prophet, you're right. Like, if we could get into a space where it is something where teachers can kind of assess where they're coming into it, some of the biases that they have, you know, even before they even get into the classroom, it can really help, you know, the development of all students, really, not just POC students, but all students, and kind of recognizing that, like, you know, there are going to be some blind spots, and where to go to kind of make sure that you can shine a light there, and not feel judged. Because I know that, you know, the cancel culture out here really kind of does keep a lot of conservative leaning like people quiet. And as a result, like their viewpoints actually aren't being heard, and can't be reconstructed in a way that can bring us back to center. And so, we want to be able to provide a space for them to kind of work these things out without feeling, attacked, if you will, and kind of handling that.
That's one of those systemic changes. You would think that by 2021, everybody would have taken a diversity class in college or in high school or element something. And why is this new? Why is this something that we haven't been doing before? So anyway.
Look, I got so many questions for y'all. I'm gonna come back to y'all. I'm gonna come back to y'all later on during this panel and after this, because y'all are just blowing my mind. I mean, just all the stuff y'all said, it's just incredible. And speaking of, it's funny, diversity, knowing how to handle individuals who don't know anything about privilege or don't know anything about cultural differences. There's a lot of that that takes place when you are a doctor. You have a lot of individuals who just come in and want to get checked out and leave, and then you have doctors who just let that happen without actually getting to the deep root of why something happening, such as a Black woman going through stress at an early age. They just say that it just happens because, whatever the case be, it just happens because of work or kids or having kids, whatever. But it's more systemic than that. It's more than just that. And being family doctors, both Dr. Garanci and Dr. Smith, how do you approach a family when they're Black, and they don't understand necessarily why they're going through so much, when sometimes the easiest answer is just the fact that they're Black. The reason that they're going through something is because they're Black, and they're living in a society that has been, treating Black individuals terribly since the beginning of the history of it, going back 400 years. How do you approach families and try to get them to understand that this is beyond just, what's happening on the outside? Like, this is not just a Band-Aid. This is going deeper. Like, as Zarek knows, this is roots. Like, this is what the roots have been in the United States over the last 400 years. How do you approach Black families and try to get them to understand stuff like that?
I think one of the things that's nice about family medicine is we make it obvious to our patients that I care just not about your health. I'm like asking what school your child went to, how they're doing in school, what are they doing like after school activities, how are their friends, and just kind of setting up that conversation of I'm looking at you as a whole person and not just your diabetes. Because as you were hinting to, your diabetes is multifactorial. There may be some genetic components. There are some cultural components about why you choose this food over that food. There's going to be stress, whether that's financial, whether that's a housing situation, whether that's transportation. And I think one of the good things is that even as a med student, I got taught to kind of look at those things, like think about what your patient went through to get to that appointment with you. Why are they 5 minutes late? It's not because they don't care about your appointment. They just had to do two buses. They don't have that opportunity to just go in their garage and hop in their car to get to this appointment. And so I think a lot of times with giving people this, like when you start to ask questions that are not, do you take your medication? Why aren't you eating more apples? I think people start to open up a little more. And really, I think medicine is trying to start to change, that we are trying to care about the whole person, emotionally, physically. And I even ask, like, spirit, like, are you spiritual? Because that can be an important component of health too, their religion and things like that. And so I think with me being Black, those conversations, people do open up a little quicker, a little easier. They'll, be very candid. Like, yes, I was not able to, pay my rent last month. I think one of the problems I have with medicine, and one of the things I feel guilty about, is if I ask you those questions, but there's nothing I can do about it. And so now you have just disclosed, you didn't have money, or you're in an abusive relationship. It's not enough for me to just say, I'm sorry, and keep it moving and be like, but your A1C is 12. And so I think that's one of the bigger issues, is that medicine is just one component, but I feel like medicine is, we still need to work within the community. I think of being a really good community partner. And I think one of the biggest strengths for a doctor is knowing what other resources are out there, because my patient is not going to just need me. And so that's how I kind of approach it, is make it that I care about them as a whole person. And people start to open up.
And Mr. Raphael asked the question, how does today medicine deal with the social determinants of health that disproportionately adversely affect POC?
So with me being really early in my career, I think the first thing is that doctors are starting to be taught that. Now, I feel like doctors in family medicine are receptive to those facts and will hear that. But like Aisha was saying, I think there is a portion of medicine that doesn't want to hear that there are social determinants of health, or don't care. So I think the big thing is teaching people in undergrad and medical school that there are these social determinants of health. But that's that is something that I struggle with, is that how do, like, if I identify them, the problems, but then I can't help, we're still kind of back in doing a circle, and that might affect our patient-doctor relationship. If you just opened up this really personal thing about, for instance, that you were abused, but I can't help you, I don't have the resources, all I can do is say sorry, that's going to prevent you from opening up to the next doctor or furthering our relationship. And so I think in family medicine, we're really big in that, and kind of, but in knowing that Black and Hispanic and people of color are disproportionately affected by these things. But I think it's going to take more than just medicine to help address them. But I don't think we're at I think there's still a lot of growth in terms of recognizing the social determinants of health.
Yeah, I can add, that's a big area of interest for mine, and it's a big focus for our program, but I'm kind of in some national networks around this too. And there's some places that are doing it amazingly well, like, some physician offices that will have basically a partnership with a food bank. And so be able to do like a food prescription and then actually be able to get it there, and not just say like, you need to eat healthier foods, but, and here you need to eat healthier foods. This is what you need to eat, and here it is, and kind of those connections. But those are scattered around this idea of a prescription program. So being able to go to the Healthy Harvest mobile market, where Rico and I met, and actually be able to take a voucher for $25, or equivalent of $25, and then being able to purchase fruits and vegetables and then go from there. But then, of course, there's all the other layers too. How do you cook in a healthy way? How do you cook in a healthy way when you're working 2 jobs and have to get the kids from daycare and do everything else? So those pieces. I think where there is potential for good and potential for harm is now systems are looking at this too. So actual health systems. It's part of the ACA is that all hospitals are required to do a community assessment, a community needs assessment, and then have some kind of intervention. Now we talked about systematic issues, and sometimes creating more systems creates more problems, right? So plus knowing that there's lots of distrust appropriately between health systems and neighborhoods. This has happened in Cincinnati, happened in Richmond too, where the locations of the neighborhoods sprawl and we move out people that have lived there forever that can no longer afford to live there. And we have dealt with this at both of our institutions. And we see it with children's too, like how do you regain trust after what's happened in Avondale? And so I say that of one of our health systems, I was just on our transitions of care committee meeting, and they chose this screening to put into place with certain places in the hospital. And the numbers were abysmal as far as even completing the screenings, let alone, as Dr. Smith, were those screenings connected. And there's just a lot of pieces of like, they didn't talk to some of it when they decided how they're going to implement this. They didn't come to our program, for instance, that has like a 20+ year history in working around the social determinants of health. So I think, again, just as we heard in all of these intersecting stories, we need to go to the best people with the best information. And that also means the community. Like the community has to be partnered with these interventions. It can't just be us saying like, this is the best way we should do it from our literal ivory tower sometimes. But we have to work with the community and say, well, what do you actually want? Like Walnut Hills is a great example. Like we know food insecurity is a problem. There's lots of different ways to address food insecurity, right? Like what's actually what the community wants. And our biggest need is still a grocery store. So, if we go in and do cooking classes all the time, and that's all we do, but instead, how do we leverage the power of our institutions to get a grocery store back into the neighborhood? So I think those are areas there's lots of ways. There's we talk with our residents about like physician agency. So how do I in my office connect somebody with a food bank versus how do we use our physician advocacy to actually change the system and improve it?
And it's funny, I feel like we're all kind of like on one topic, which is basically we need more collaboration between everybody, between education, healthcare, politics, you can name it. We need collaboration between everybody. How do you see yourself working with someone like a Mr. Raphael, who is going to be a mayor soon? How do you see yourself basically, I don't know, leveraging for that power to get like a grocery store and a Kroger, but like as a doctor, how you feel yourself trying to get that power to get more of a diverse approach to things in the hospital, like hospital?
That's a good question. I feel like a lot of it is just it's just kind of hustling and being out there and making connections. And the tough part is, to go back to Aisha's part, like I'm not necessarily paid for this stuff. I love it and I'm passionate about it, and it's the only way I can do my job in a way that will be sustainable and not lead to burnout. So I do it. And yet, just as a lot of people are saying, like if we're not incentivized to do it, then how's going to continue? Or if I left, like who's going to continue it? But to answer your question, a lot of it's just like I try to make connections wherever I can. So the whole connection that we have with Walnut Hills kind of started out with me reaching out to somebody on the Walnut Hills Redevelopment Foundation, and then we had like a 2-hour meeting, and it's we now have a 3-year partnership coming out of that. And then going to the area council meetings and listening and hearing what the problems are, and like, okay, how can we leverage?
Oh, you went mute on us for a second. Dr. Garanci, you went mute. Can you hear us?
I don't think she can hear us.
I don't think she can hear.
She's not on mute.
That's so weird.
I think she's got to disconnect her AirPods.
Yeah, you might want to text her what's going on, because I don't think she gets it yet.
I'll text her.
Cause she was going, she was speaking that word. Oh man, I don't even know what happened. But until we get
your ear pod, your
Until we get her back.
Yes.
Oh, we got it. We got it.
Let me see. Okay, am I back?
There we go. Yeah.
Oh, sorry guys. Where'd you lose me? Uh-oh.
Oh, shoot, we lost you. About
Right when I started doing the funny stuff. I don't know.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Anybody know what I was talking about? Sorry, yeah, I think was I talking about higher level? I think the higher level collaboration.
You were just about to talk about like making connect, like you cut off
Yeah.
after you said like it's important to just make connections. So that's right.
Yeah,
where
you said you made a 3-year, you got a 3-year connection out of a Zoom meeting.
Okay. Great, thanks. Yeah, so I think the other kind of connections you mentioned, like as far as like city, you know, I've met with some city councilmen before. That was around senior issues mostly. But I think, you know, where can we see because we see the problems in medicine in a different way, right? If we kind of start seeing issues popping up. So saying like, I know the issue, here's the information I have, but I don't necessarily know how that translates to government. How can we work together? I think that's one example of that. I think where it gets harder is those higher level with like the hospital institutions higher up. And again, it's just like getting on the right committees and trying to be a voice there. We do have an anti-racism task force at UC now, which is really exciting with the College of Medicine. And I think that's going to be a great force. And then also just kind of knowing, I think Aisha hinted at this, but knowing when you need to get out too, of like, if you're on a committee or you're doing something where it's kind of like a rubber stamp kind of thing, and like how do you step away when you need to make sure you're leveraging your work the best you can.
Which leads me to the next question, and I feel like this is where Raphael Prophet can come in somehow. After hearing what the doctors have said, both Dr. Smith and Dr. Garansky, what would you do as a mayor to make sure that their ideas and their approaches become reality? You know, they just said that all the things that they want to see happen in the hospital that they're in and in the community that they're in. What would you do to make that a reality?
Here, Rico, and I'm going to put it not just on myself, but all of us, right? And so, in order for us, and this is why I'm running. If you had asked me a year ago if I would be running for mayor, I would have told you no, but probably hell no, right? Because that just wasn't in my path, right? I was looking to retire. A friend of mine, another retired firefighter, we're looking to start a nonprofit in which we did public medical to seek to transform public safety. And I'll talk about that just a second to get at my point. But the reason why I decided to run because of COVID, because of the social movement, because of how it just revealed all of this stuff that folks like me and others known and has been persisted for generations, and having that access to a city government. Incapable of really getting at or seizing the moment, because this is an opportunity. It was an opportunity, right? All of this stuff to show some courageous and creative leadership, but it wasn't happening, right? And so again, this is my city, born, raised, educated here. I'm raising my family here, and just part of it. I know it may sound, sort of melodramatic, but duty called, man. It was time to step up. Right. And really sort of get at these things that have been plaguing us. And so to answer your question, it's going to require, and this is why I say all of us, it's going to require paradigm shift, and first of our leaders, some selfless leadership, right? That come in and do what's right. Public servants, especially political, you're supposed to be working for the common good, not private interest, right? It's always been that balance in this property owning democracy that we live in, private interest versus public good. Well, the politician's supposed to serve the public good. They're supposed to be that buffer between the private interest that is always going to have access. That's just the way our society is structured. And so we, or what I'm seeking to become, is that we are the ones who stand for the public good, right? And so that's what it's really going to require. But and now you see this crisis that we have at our city hall, and this corruption crisis going on. It's leaning toward private interest instead of public good. So I just wanted to preface this, but I give you this in, we're having a class, and Dan, I think you saw it because I forgot to send it to you, right? Because here's the start, because this is what we were going to be doing when I retired, public medical, trying to transform public safety, firefighters, cops, EMTs, healthcare, or I should say, community health folks. They're the front line, right? They're the front lines of what we're talking about, health. Most of incidents and runs that cops, firefighters, EMTs make are health related, right? And so if we don't start right there, or trying to figure out how to improve these outcomes and get at these social determinants of health, social determinants of crime, social determinants of learning. I mean, you can go on and on, but that's what politicians are supposed to be doing, right? That's what our jobs. We're supposed to be standing for the common good, right? And so we have a course that we're putting at Xavier. I'm an adjunct faculty at Xavier, and my director. It's funny how the time was when this thing hit last spring. He said, Raphael, hey man, this right on time for what you've been talking about. Would you like to come in and do this course? Yeah, John, come on, let's do it, right? I didn't think I'd be running for mayor, but here it is, the timing. And so Tuesday, and I can send you all, because it's a webinar, right? And I sent it out to Dan, you probably don't know it. I got a list of all of the people who are running for city council. And matter of fact, it's like 80 of them, like 80 plus so far, right? I mean, imagine that, right? Which is a good thing, I think. I think it's a good thing. And so I got it from the Board of Elections. I got all their email addresses. And so I blasted it out that we're going to have this 4 sessions. It's talking about transforming public safety. We're going to bring experts from the fire department, from the police department, community health, and then we're going to bring another experts that are going to talk about some of these programs and efforts to get at what the docs are talking about, right? To try to get at these social determinants. Hey, I don't want my doc to be thinking about, anything about just getting me well, right? But me as a firefighter, whatever profession I am, I'm going to be dealing with that other stuff. I want Dr. Anna and Dr. Latoya. I just want them to be thinking about getting me well, right? And so that's a start. That public officials, and that's why this is the great opportunity here. Public officials have to do that hard lifting, because I don't see how it gets done. If private interest, if they would have the strategic foresight to say, hey, that's going to save us money. If we really get into these things, that'll save us money in the long term. Well, but investors and all of that, like, I've got to have my money now. I can't be thinking about, right? So, and that's why I believe that in order to really look out for the common good, is the politicians, and it's got to be that paradigm shift. And so, I don't know. I know that was a long answer to your question, but I just believe that's if we're going to get at these things, and what better opportunity, right? COVID, in the social movement, we got to find the positive things out of this, and that's it. This is an opportunity. We all see it, right? But we got to get at it in a meaningful way, in a meaningful systemic, I should say metrics, right? Because you have a lot of politicians, they come, we're going to do this, and they do something, and you look and they did nothing. And so you got to have some metrics behind this, right? You got to show that it actually did something. And if it didn't go, okay, let's scrap that and let's get something else, or we tweak it, or whatever we have to do. And one thing about my experience, again, as a firefighter and a soldier, is that, especially a soldier, and I've written a lot of historical stuff, and I know total war. I know what total war looks like, and we can get at this stuff using that same mindset, total war, is that you allocate all your resources to getting at this thing. So
total war, total war. So you're going to declare total war on the city of Cincinnati when you become there?
Hold up now. I ain't gonna be assaulting City Hall now. Come on now. I didn't say that.
I mean, with the way city council is falling apart, something needs to happen.
Oh, it's again, it's all of us. We just got to hold them accountable, right? Got to hold them accountable. And this is not this our public servants, and that's I keep reiterating that our public servants have got to be this. It can't be an opportunity. It can't be an ambition, right? It's okay, but you got to do what you need to do on your way up to a flagpole, right? Other than, okay, I'm going to get in here, cater to those money interests so they can, pad my campaign. So now I have enough money that I can run for governor or Congress, because you look at all this money that it takes to run for political office, and that's what's motivating. And so you have a person like me that, my fundraising is challenged because I'm talking about, I'm trying to get at some things for the common good. Well, that's not going to help my bottom line, right? But it's us as citizens. If we got to hold our public officials accountable.
I agree. And Latoya Smith, Dr. Latoya Smith, what would you ask Raphael right now to help you in regards of achieving your goals? If you had all, a PowerPoint, I don't know, a document, a plan, something right now, some real brief that you can just give to him and say, this is what I need. This is what we desire in order to make this happen. What would you come to him with, Dr. Smith?
Ooh, that's a hard question. I think the biggest things would be just, as we were talking about before, like fairness and equality. I think in both like housing and healthcare and access to those things would be like my biggest ask, just because I do believe that really does affect people's health. And it's really easy from the medical side. There's a lot of really good proven medicines. And for the patients that I do see as a resident, those patients do have health care, which is great. And so having everybody have health care is also important. But I think the medicines most of the time are covered, but it's just those other things that really can affect your life.
What about COVID? Because I know I was talking to Dr. Garanci about this, about COVID, and how, a lot of our older individuals in Cincinnati have not been able to get the access to it as great as they should have, especially black elders. And what would you ask him to do in terms of that, in terms of COVID vaccinations?
I think the biggest thing is making it easier for people to access. Right now, you really do have to jump over a lot of hoops to get it. You either have to have access to the computer a lot of times, or access to transportation and be lucky enough to be in that specific Walgreens that has extra doses. So I think the biggest thing is making it where the access to even sign up for appointments is fair. And then the other thing is to make sure to spread it out to all the different neighborhoods. You're at a disadvantage if you don't have internet and if you don't have a car in Cincinnati, even if you do qualify based off of age. And I think the other thing is having forums to talk about the vaccine and talk about people's hesitancies, because a lot of people are scared about the vaccine. It has been COVID has been in the news. A lot of things, almost science and politics have kind of been pitted against each other this last year. And so in our office, we definitely have a lot of, I open up to the patients and, ask them what are their thoughts about the vaccine, and try to see where they're at and see if I can answer any of those questions. But I think as a city, we need to do a little bit more of education so that right now there's still a scarcity, but once the vaccine is available to everybody, I'm worried that the people that will have a lot of doses, but we won't have people that are willing to take it.
Yeah, there's been some interesting recommendations from physicians of color kind of nationally too, of actually changing like the age, the way we're rolling it out by age in Ohio, which a lot of states chose to do. But when there were conversations early on, when we're talking about like equity and fairness, as we were kind of saying, I think the age is a great example of that. Like that feels fair, right? But for one thing, we know that there's close to, in some areas, a 10-year difference in life expectancy. And we also know that Black men and women have been affected far disproportionately by COVID and also at younger ages. So if you look at both the hospitalizations and deaths, you look at race and age, a lot of those are, at least 5 to 10 years up. And we've seen, Rico and I have seen a lot of people come out on Fridays. We are out at the Walnut Hills Food and Fun event, Food and Fun event on Fridays. And a lot of people in their 50s are coming, or 64, which again feels super arbitrary. It's like, oh, well, you're 64, so you're going to have to wait who knows how long now. Mm-hmm. Whereas in the beginning, there was a lot of discussion from the CDC and also the other locations and statewide to talk about, well, we should target this to the highest or the people most affected. But then when it came down to it, I think there was just so much uncertainty from the previous administration, and these had to roll out so quickly. So people just many states reverted to the easiest approach, which was age, which again seems fair, but it's not if you look at actually who's being affected by it. Especially like a lot of the roles, we know a lot of African Americans that are being exposed are in essential roles like grocery stores and house staff in the nursing homes and hospitals. So they're still getting exposed, yet they're not getting the vaccine just because most of the people that are older are not working and therefore not as exposed as much. And this is coming from a geriatrician. So, I'm like, of course, I'm glad my older adults are getting it, but I do wish I wish the government had made different decisions of how that was going to be rolled out.
I agree. I really agree, because it all starts at the top, right? It all starts at the top and works its way down. And when there's no leadership at the top, everyone else is forced to fend for themselves and figure out what to do. And that's kind of what happened with our last administration. States were forced to figure out how to handle COVID when they had no idea how to. So Mr. Prophet, they basically laid out the plan. What is your leadership for taking over this? How are you going to handle COVID if it's still around, becoming mayor? Because I feel like COVID's not going to go away anytime soon. I think we all know that. But let's just say you're becoming mayor now. How are you going to handle it if you were forced to become mayor tomorrow? Say, for instance, as a hypothetical.
Yeah, that's a tough one there, Rico. Really, that's a tough one, right? Because any time the new position, it requires an assessment, right? But we're right in the middle of it, right? And so I would have to do a quick assessment just to see where we are, right? But I wanted to get at what Latoya said, Dr. Latoya said, and we talked about this, and we even sent this to the city, is that we knew that there were going to be maybe a shortage of qualified people just administering the shots, right? And so our company, we sent a recommendation that, hey, we got firefighters who are paramedics and EMTs, let's get them blown up on being able to administer the vaccine when the vaccine actually gets there. And so when we get it, we can really, inoculate so many people because we'll have this structure already in place. I don't think it happened, right? Also, we're dealing with when you're talking about people of color, and especially Black folks not taking it. I don't know if you saw me. It's a chicken coming home to roost. There's a systemic distrust of medicine by Black people, and a lot of it, and it's been torn out from generation to generation to generation. And if you ask a kid, why don't you want to go to the doctor? I don't know, I just don't trust them. That's because is that their grandparents or great grandparents, they knew, they understood exactly why you don't trust them. You know, some of the stuff that was done in experiments to Tuskegee, even here, you see radiation, right? And but it's also how they were treated too, right? And so, and I have relatives, older relatives, who would refuse to go to the hospital, the doctor. And so all of these things, right? And it's just like a culminating effect here. And that's why I say that we just have, as a society, we just have a great opportunity, because all of these things are so evident, they're so obvious. But now it's just going to take some courageous leadership to really get at them. So if I became a mayor right now, I'd probably start firing everybody. No, just
like total war. Total war.
I don't know. I'm just, and it's leadership. It's not the people. It's that who you need to do is that you need to fire the leaders. That's who needs to be, right? Is that and that's why I said at the chat, there's all levels of leadership. You can't just blame the national leadership for a lot of these issues that are going on. It's all sort of, we are a what's our form of democracy, right? That the state, sort of runs it and all of that stuff, right? And so you can't just blame the national government. There was an opportunity and our governor, he started off strong, but there was some reluctance to really just do what was really required. Those luck is down for a while, making people wear the masks and social distance. And I think we would have been a little better off if we would have really just sort of had the guts to see it through. And even the city, and we wrote the city, hey, make it a requirement that you can overrule the governor. You can make it a requirement to wear a mask in the city of Cincinnati. And so so now you apply pressure from here, because there's different levels of leadership, right? Mm-hmm. So there was some opportunity for our cities, and we certainly recommended it. You had cities like Austin, Texas, who put some stringent guidelines in early. And we said, hey, here's an example, do that, right? But again, leadership, and a lot of it, I believe, is because, folks are, they're doing the right thing for their careers instead of what's best for the common good. So.
Right. And you're right about that. It's all about leadership and taking lead of this conversation. I'm loving it all. I appreciate y'all talking, and just everything just so much need to be said and need to be heard. I just want to leave this last 25 minutes to open forum. If you have any questions, any comments, any concerns from a panelist to a person watching this, you are free to speak it. If not, I'm gonna keep throwing questions out. But if you got a question or comment, this is your time for the last 25 minutes. Get our educators back in here and get them talking again.
Hey, I would just say again, because I had an 8:30, and actually I had to I was going to stick around the whole point. I get.
So it's okay.
Okay, yeah, but I'll take a couple questions before I go, if that's okay. If anyone has any questions.
Yes. So if you got a question for Mr. Prophet before he go, this is your time. My question is, how is Ashton Tank? Oh, I'm sorry. I think someone else had a question. My bad.
Go ahead. Somebody has a question? No? All right. Hey, did you all see I put in the chat, right? And it's I'll call you back 2 minutes. Your emails, I can send you over the syllabus, right? That of that course I was talking about. And again, it's a course for the Xavier students, and they're actually, they're matriculated, so they'll be evaluated. But for the community auditors, what Xavier have allowed observe is that it's just an observation, just to give you some insights to what public safety looks like from the Cincinnati standpoint, and some ideas of some different efforts from this paramedicine. I'm sure the docs have heard of that term before. This sort of burgeoning, a sort of effort to try to improve outcomes and sort of relieve the strain, especially on EDs, right? And so that's what this is about, and it is going to give the students an opportunity to come up with their own, to try to come up with some efforts, and we're going to require them to just go around the country and the world and find some efforts that are getting at these health outcomes, and maybe we'll use them to try to persuade our public policy folks to make some differences here. So, but the Zoom is in the chat. If you want me to email you the syllabus, Dan, you can capture the emails, and I can email them to them if that's okay.
Absolutely.
All right. That being said, folks, thanks for having me. And hey, profitformayor.com, spread the word.
Yes, sir. Thank you for coming. Appreciate you.
Thank you. I enjoyed this. Thank you.
All right. You have a good rest of the night. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
That guy, he's a good guy. I think he's going to be, hopefully, I'm hoping he'll be the next mayor. Tired of Mr. Cranley. Thank goodness he's gone. But yeah, open forum. Anybody got any comments, questions? Feel free. Yes. And
can you hear me okay? Yeah. Dan invited me, so it's his fault right now. One, just thank you for the time and those sorts of things. I had an aside question, and it was if Derek was still playing for USA Rugby, but that's another conversation. I have some connections to that and the women's training side. So when I looked at kind of your bio, I was very excited. But in looking, Rico, at Black Power Initiative and hearing everybody's story, kind of one of the common factors that I saw was just kind of several different ways of describing swimming upstream as we face kind of diversity and inclusion and reaching people where they're at and those I work in healthcare also. I'm a DPT, but I work more kind of in corporate healthcare and am on a diversity and inclusion panel. And I find that a lot of the same things that you're talking about, we've dealt with, the analysis paralysis and the other things. And kind of from thinking about Black Power Initiative, is there any advice you would have about empowering people, one, to ask for more, to ask for help, to ask for what I need, to ask for resources to meet people where they are, like how we go from I want to do this to I'm empowered or enabled to do that step and to go that next way down the path?
So good question. I think it all starts with leading by example, and me being willing to ask for help myself in some way, form, or fashion, because there are times where I need help myself, and just like any other person, being the prideful guy that I am, I'm like, I can kind of hold off, or I can kind of like do it myself, or because I'm the only child, so I always just feel like I could do a lot of things myself. But there are times where I do need help. And to empower someone to ask for help, you have to show them that you're willing to ask for help yourself. And also be willing to do it with a heart that is not just clearly looking to be featured on the news or on Facebook or Instagram, having a heart that wants to just do it and not do it for the accolades, not do it for the claim, not do it for the fame, the money, the wealth. And I tell people, I did not start BPI on the basis of making money, a nonprofit. I'm not trying to make money. I'm just trying to help people as much as I can. And if I can do that, if I can help one person, that's perfect for me. I'm not going to try to help 100 people. If I can't help one person perfectly, I'm not going to try to help 100 people semi-perfectly or imperfectly. So I make it a big goal to help one person at a time, fulfill the needs that they need. And I try to make sure that they know that I'm doing it just to do it and not to do it for the fame or for all the other things that a lot of these people who have, the charities and whatnot try to do it just to get taxes or try to, to get taxes deducted or to say that they did something or whatever. I want to do it because I want to do it, and I need the people to see that. So yeah, I think that's really the big things for me is making sure that I do it to do it, and they know I do it to do it, and not do it to create some sort of fame for myself. And really, I feel like that's really how it is being an educator or being a doctor, or you got to do it because you want to do it. You're not going to get a lot of money as an educator. You're not going to get a lot of money as a doctor unless you're working, at a really, really, really expensive private healthcare firm. You're going to have to work through the ranks and become somebody through all that. So I just feel like with all these different professions, you got to be able to cut the ego, cut the pride, and know that you're making a living, but also making a living for other people, whether that's health, education, food, whatever the case may be.
And also, I'm kind of going to touch on it. Hi, nobody knows who I am. I'm Sasha. I'm Rico's aunt, and I'm a part of Black Power Initiative as well. And I started the food program that spun off with BPI. And I think what helps us get people receptive to help is addressing the fact that help is needed. I think that a lot of people don't talk about, a lot of people in my generation are trying to fake it to make it. They are just lying. They're just making their lives to seem one way, and it's just a lie because society has put on us that we have to be this way. We have to have so much money in our account. We have to travel the world right now. We have to be well off right now. So it scares everybody into asking for anything. It scared me into asking for things. It was like, Sasha, you have to figure this out on your own. You're supposed to. You're an adult now. You figure it out on your own. But I learned that was a generational curse that was brought on my life. I think, like I said, people seeing like, oh, there are people out there like me going through this too. Because no matter how, the fact that there are billions of people in the world, we still think, oh my God, this is only happening to me. Nobody can relate. So the more that people keep possessing that, the more people keep saying everything's okay, it scares the people who need help into asking for it. So I think addressing it, hey, we know you need some food, shit. Let me get you some food, and not ask for anything in return. That was another thing that I feel like people in my generation have spun off. Oh, don't ask me for nothing if I can't ask you. Don't you call me to watch these kids if I can't call you. Don't you ask me for no money if I can't ask you. All this, tit for tat, you do for me, I do for you. That's the only way we can help each other. So like I said, just addressing it like, hey, I'm just sitting here not doing anything. I have a talent that can help somebody. So instead of me harboring it to myself, holding it to myself, trying to figure out how I can get rich off of it, why not just use the platform that I have, which is me, I can cook, to help feed somebody else that probably can't cook, probably can't get access to food, probably didn't have the time to cook because me, I'm a mother of 2 little children. You've seen one of them. And you just feel like no matter what, you're supposed to figure it out. So just addressing the fact that there's help, like, oh, I need help. And I think that helps. I think that helps bring the people out.
And if I can, I'd like to, so there are 2 parts of that I think are really important to just kind of acknowledge that one, that like there's a certain amount of generational trauma that shows up, especially for POC families and things of that nature. And kind of addressing that trauma is something even, you know, even Mr. Prophet was trying to hint at as well, that like that acknowledgement is worth it just because all the things that can come out of it will be so powerful just because now the conversation's open, but then also how there's that extra, that layer of distrust or mistrust around like, getting help. So seeking therapy or having that be a plausible avenue, especially for Black folks, and really kind of diving into that space and kind of getting more, people of color as mental health professionals to engender that trust as well, can actually be extremely transformative and restorative, as a part of like the process to get folks into a space where they're more vulnerable, where they want to be able to talk about those vulnerabilities. And then at the same rate, institutions can also have generational trauma. And a lot of those institutions find themselves in spaces where they have to address something that they might not be responsible for, but it has landed on their plate. And the leadership has to be able to respond to that. And I think post George Floyd, there's been a lot more calls to recognize and be more transparent around the recognition of like some of those vulnerabilities, some of those blind spots, things of that nature, how people need help, and really kind of labeling it for what it is. And that makes a lot of institutions uncomfortable in general. And like, you can go back to like June and see how many companies went out and, put the black square on Instagram, but at the same rate, like really kind of asking those companies, what have you done since then systematically, to stand up for that black square, to really kind of say that, I am blacking out to make, Black voices heard more so, or I'm giving my platform over, or, I'm really trying to work at undoing some of the systems that I benefited from. And so one of the things that I talk about with our faculty, but then also even with a lot of the consultant work that I do is, really thinking about how we can kind of view the bigger picture in general. So like if you imagine that you're walking on a lake and you see a dead fish, you might think to yourself like, oh, okay, dead fish may have been too old or something like that. Something may have happened to it. And if you cross another one, you're going to try to make the relationship between the two. And eventually, if you look up and you notice that the lake is filled with them, at what point do you stop thinking about the individual dead fish, but rather what's wrong with the lake? And really getting into more of the like, is creating that system that is creating dead fish. And so, and that's akin to, police brutality and how like, each time an unarmed Black person is killed, how there are some groups that want to treat them as individual isolated events, but rather this is actually something that is continuing to happen. So now we're not looking at the person, but rather what's wrong with the bigger picture here. And I think those types of questions, when we get into more of the systems thinking, starts to get at the fabric of America itself, which is an uncomfortable conversation, I recognize, but it's a necessary one in order for us to continue to keep moving forward.
You hit the nail on the coffin. I mean, it absolutely hit the nail on the coffin. We have to keep moving forward. And in order to do that is to continue to look at the big picture. And we can't continue to look at the small picture. We got to look at the whole big picture and realize that the big picture is filled with a bunch of tiny little puzzles that we can all chip away at, and try to fit in together. Like the education, the healthcare, the systemic racism, the even mass incarceration, and even going to having resources and opportunities, all these different things we can chip away at and look at the puzzles and be like, okay, we can put this puzzle here, put that puzzle here. And then it just becomes a giant puzzle. Like, okay, now we see what all these things can become if we work at it. And so, yeah, I think what Derek and Sasha both said all plays a part in what I do and what we try to do to make our communities better. Um, there's also another thing I was gonna say. Also, that relatability is so big. I mean, it's like when I go to Walnut Hills and I go there and I see these people and they're grabbing clothes out of the baskets that I put out, I'm talking to them. I'm saying hello. I'm saying, hey, how your day's going? What's going on with you? How are you feeling? If you I'm not putting no pressure on them. I'm not saying, oh yeah, you getting these clothes. So why you getting these clothes? I'm saying, here, all this stuff is free. You find something, it's yours. Feel free to take it. Don't feel obligated to take it because you need it. Feel obligated because you want it, not because you need it. Feel obligated because you want it. Because it look good, not because it's something that you need and I'm giving it out because you need it. It's something that you want because it looks nice. And so I try to make it as relatable as possible, to the point where they're not talking to somebody that's giving them help. They're talking to somebody that wants to work beside them and not in front of them or not on top of them. Where I'm working beside them, not in front of them, or I'm not nowhere ahead of them. So just showing that we're working beside them and not working in front of them. Thank you for your question, by the way.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, Dr. Garancy and Dr. Smith, uh, as doctors, what is the toughest challenge to you, right now as everything's beginning to unravel with COVID, with the Biden administration, with Christ Hospital and all these hospitals in the city? What's the toughest challenge that you see on a day-to-day basis that you just go, I wish this didn't exist?
Yeah, Dr. Smith, feel free to jump in too. I think the vaccine stuff has been hard because um, so our nursing home, for instance, where I work, we had an outbreak in December, and we lost a total of like 18 patients, 18 residents, not even patients, 18 residents, people that we've known for years. So I remember that feeling, and it was actually, we got the vaccine. We were one of the earliest ones to get the vaccine. So we got the vaccine like 2 days before Christmas. And so there was this like elation of like, okay, there's hope. There's something coming. It's coming in the midst of that loss. So it was just a very bittersweet experience period. But we had this new hope for the first time in 10 months. And then seeing how it's actually rolled out and seeing how quickly the racial inequity developed and how severe it is already was and is heartbreaking. And I think the frustration is, for me, it's just kind of like, we knew this was coming. Like, why weren't we ready? Why is it that we have places where we don't have a phone option and we're using the patient portals or the internet? Like, why weren't we ready for this? So I think that's the biggest one for me, is just kind of like the moral trauma of that, of like, we have this thing here, we know it's going to save lives, and yet it's still just the same inequities are playing out. I think it's really hard to watch. Also, because even as there's only so much we could do. Even just like the one-on-one, Rico, I like what you said about like, if you could impact one person. So like, if I can connect one person with a vaccine, that's awesome. But I wish there was more I could do. Like, even as a doctor, I'm really limited in how I can actually impact that.
Yeah, I would agree. With me being like still in training and residency, it's been difficult to like deal with the losses and also deal with like that feeling of knowing that Black people have been so disproportionately affected by COVID, but feeling like there's nothing I can do besides like educating people about it. But seeing like the people in the ICU, seeing the people of color, and then seeing the dichotomy of walking in the lobby the vaccine. So those couple of things like hit you pretty hard of you want to do so much, but kind of that frustration of I'm still learning the basics of being a doctor, but also feeling that burden of I'm a Black doctor and feeling that burden of like not being able to help my people has been really hard. And just even like with family members, you know, having those frank conversations, and is what people were talking about before. There's a big mistrust of healthcare. Even with my family, they have a doctor in their family, and there's still that. I like on Christmas, I had like a Zoom with like 30 people to try to answer my family members' questions, but I'm one of them, and they're still of now you're a them, you're part of the problem now, and so just that burden of feeling like I know the statistics, but not exactly sure how to help.
So basically, what I'm hearing from both of you is just limitations and feeling that you can't help everybody as much as you wish you could, um, and seeing the limitations impact people that you really wish you can help. Um, yeah, that's tough. I'm so sorry that you both got to go through that, because that's, I mean, that's frontline type stuff, is seeing the limitations. And even the educators, like, you know, you see that limitation on your students, and you see it in your patients, see it in your students, and you're just like, man, wish I can do something about that. um, Miss Moore, what would you say? Will you have to agree with that? Probably limitations probably be your toughest struggle as an educator and administration, maybe one of your, if not one of your toughest.
Yeah, it's on the list. I think, I agree with um, COVID kind of peeled back. COVID revealed a lot of inequities in a lot of areas. I mean, you're dealing with kids that come from homes that don't have computers, don't have internet, and then you tell the kids, oh, well, we're not going to be in school, so you're going to go virtual. So the inequities right there. I mean, not everybody has that, and um, you're right, not being able to do a whole lot. But through my career, I've found and understood that resources are a huge help for a lot of people. So I try to make sure that if I'm going to ask the question, I'm going to have a resource for you. Now, it might not be the right one, but I'm trying to help you. Somebody can point you in the right direction. So that is one of the hardest. And I think change is the next hardest, because you can't change grown people. You can't, because they're set in their ways and they've been raised a certain way, but you can get them to think and be empathetic. Um, it's just hard, when you want people to be treated right, no matter what color they are, what gender, what they identify as, whatever. And you have people that are loving to put it in a box, that to me, that's the hardest part, because I can scream in your face and tell you to do the right thing all day long, but you'll say, okay, I'm going to do it. And then you turn around. And when you go into your classroom, that's like your own domain. You close your door and you teach those kids. So how do I trust that you are doing the right thing for the kids when you close your door? So to me, that's the hardest part, because you don't know. There's so many unknowns. And like I said earlier, I'm on a hamster wheel. I'm always on that hamster wheel of, sure, we want this work. Go ahead and bust it out. And so I work my ass off and I do what I can. And they say, oh, well, we'll do that next week. Or, well, there's always something. So those are the hard parts for me in education. And Derek, I see you shaking your head. You probably feel me, right? So.
It's almost as if we work together already. So it is an uphill battle, but at the same time, I think, Rico, you kind of hinted at it too, that the end goal is that there are populations that definitely benefit from it if you continue to do it, and so that perseverance is in itself progress. I think just because that's what's going to hold you accountable Whereas like, you know, you can also hold the institution accountable as well.
Right. Because it's what we're doing, all of us, even Dan and Rebecca, it's all just perseverance and continuing to make sure we leave an impression for the next generation, and then they leave it for the next generation, because we're not going to achieve complete, you know, a utopia within our lifetimes. I wish we could say that, but it's impossible, as things have not changed that much over 400 years, have we seen. Um, so it's half the battle. You know, we can only do so much to individuals who go back home to their lives and their homes, and they go back and they have to repeatedly train and teach themselves and read, like you said earlier, read. It's like you have to continue to do these things in order to become better each and every day. And yes, Dr. Garansi, perseverance is progress. That really is some encouragement. And thank you, Derek, for that. That's some encouragement, because you know when you're falling down and you can't get up and you don't want to go to work the next day, you just got to remember is perseverance, and shoot, that's progress in itself.
Yeah, and you know, my wife is an OBGYN, and you know, watching her come home and try to like navigate the space of what it's like working at a very diverse like neighborhood, like Sunset Park, which is where she's at Maimonides Hospital here, and kind of taking in some of those traumas of working with babies during COVID and like the racial components of that, you know, how she's processing it, and then what she's coming home with, what she's expected to kind of drop and leave at the door. Even that can be very difficult to do every single day. And so I tip my hat, you know, to you guys that work in the healthcare industry, just because, you know, you do have to kind of put yourself on the back burner so many times. And at a time like this, like, you know, it's stressful enough as it is. But even more so when you've got to consider that there are limitations, that there are things that you can't necessarily, you know, wave a magic wand and do. You just have to be able to figure out like where you can push, you will, and you know where you have to like kind of accept that this is something that is out of your control. You can at least talk about it and have a space to really kind of process some of those institutional like issues that show up constantly. And I think more people that become aware of them eventually might get enough of a critical mass there to be able to push towards working at like, you know, just dismantling pieces here and there. And so, you know, for me at least, I know that, you know, Buckley's a bit of a microcosm of a lot of conservative spaces, and you know, them getting into a space where they can trust my judgment for them is already a big move. And but that takes time, and it takes a lot of just conversations in general, and I can't be expected to be trusted right out of the gate, despite the fact that, you know, I've felt like I've been very thorough, but even still people are going to be prideful, they're going to be hesitant, and kind of working within, you know, that realm, and making sure that, you know, if you look at it as a pendulum, right now it might be one direction, but your job isn't to swing it in the other, but rather to center it, and kind of bring it back to the middle, so that, you know, even if you do pull it too far, you can at least correct it to get it back to center. And that can be in itself a very rewarding process once you kind of get an idea of, you know, the space that you're navigating.
All about balance.
Right.
All about balance.
My
Bringing
mindset
us
at this point.
right, and it's so hard to find. But once you find that balance, it's everything just comes so much easier after that, or not easier, but I wouldn't even say less stressful, but like it just becomes more manageable. That's the word. It becomes more manageable once you find that balance and you can achieve it. And then once it swing to the right, now you figure out the techniques and the ways that you can bring it back to the center. And that's what it's all about. That's what life all about, really.
Right. And I would add on to that, not coming into it in, it can be very difficult to try to figure out where the line of demarcation is, but not coming into it as if you're in the savior role, right? That all of these people need me and I'm the only one that can do this. But rather, what can you set up with your platform so that anybody can be you?
Mm-hmm.
Kind of continue that work forward so that when you leave, when you inevitably leave, it does not create a vacuum like, oh, this work now has dropped to the wayside because the person in power has now left, and now where's our motivation to continue? And so oftentimes when starting off consultant work, I often say, like, the best job I can do is one where I work myself to obsolescence, where you literally have to tell me you don't need me anymore, because
Mm-hmm.
now I know that this work has become your work and you guys are going to delegate this going forward. And so that's a very big, like, I guess, like, piece of what I do here is like setting it up. And so that, like, even if I did disappear, like, the work can continue because now it has been delegated enough to where the actual work is just interspersed. It's more integrated, and not looking towards, what I've got to offer, but rather like really kind of building the experiences from others.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And with that being said, that was a perfect way to conclude. Is 9:10. Wrapping up. If anyone got any last comments, questions, concerns, feel free. But I want to just say thank you to everybody that showed up, that just listened, that said something, participated, that didn't participate. We appreciate you. And I appreciate all the panelists for just coming and speaking your words, speaking your truth, speaking what you experienced, what you seen, what you heard, what you feel, everything in between. And I just want to thank everybody for coming tonight. And it's been just wonderful. This is a recorded clip that's going to get played over and over again, personally. And I'll make sure that other people see this because they need to see this. So yeah, thank you everybody. I love y'all, and yes, it'll be on our Facebook page, and the discussion can keep going. So this is what it's all about: is starting discussion in these panels and continue to discuss these things, even when things don't want to be discussed, and then putting that discussion into action, like we all know. So yep.
Thank you, Dan and Rico, for organizing this. This is always useful, even for me to just kind of use as a teaching tool for my own colleagues.
Right. Thank
Appreciate
you.
that.
Thank you.
Big thanks to Dan on that one, because he was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's totally do it. I was like, all right, well, okay. Find some great people. And finding you all wasn't the hardest, but it was definitely the most rewarding part, because I was like, I already know I wanted to get on this. So yeah, thank you, Dan, thank you everyone for being including. I mean, for coming in and talking. You all have a safe and beautiful week, and be safe, everybody.